Hey there! This video is going to be all about overheating and run times of the Canon R5 Mark II. And so for the R5 II, I am personally most interested in the 4K 24 fine mode for long form recording like interviews, podcasts, etc. This fine mode is the 4K mode that oversamples the full 8K from the sensor. Now, usually Canon provides overheating times for their cameras, and from what I have found in my personal testing, they seem to be pretty accurate. Now, this is the only chart that I could find for the R5 II, and it seems kind of random what they provide: 8K 60 RAW, 8K 30, 4K 60, 1080 30, and these are all with autofocus disabled. Now, for those modes, I think the only one people are most curious about is the 4K 60, but I think, like I said, I'm personally most interested in the 4K 24 fine mode, and I think a lot of other people out there, because it does look really good, and most people are shooting long form stuff in 4K 24 or 4K 30. It should work pretty similarly in 24, 25, or 30 frames per second. Now, I know a lot of us, including myself, want to use this camera for video production and content creation, but remember, this is a photo hybrid camera. It does have some great video capabilities, but it is definitely a photo hybrid camera and it does not have a fan. I do also have the cooling grip, and we will be talking about that and seeing how that does with the camera. Now, there are almost infinite combinations of resolutions, frame rates, codecs, autofocus, stabilization, cooling grip or not, indoor versus outdoor, etc. So I did a bunch of tests, and I will report those results with you, but I can't test every situation, so please keep that in mind. So it's currently October here in North Carolina, and it isn't really that hot at this time of the year. I do usually really like to stress test cameras and test them in the heat and humidity, which I can definitely do most of the time in North Carolina here, but it's already cooled off quite a bit. It's been around 75 degrees Fahrenheit lately as a high, and a lot of the days have also been cloudy and rainy. Also, the days are getting shorter, so getting a few tests done one day to compare different modes in a camera has been really tough. I also have to fully let the camera cool down in between tests, so unfortunately, I'm going to be focusing mainly on the indoor tests for this video. I'll probably have to revisit next summer for those type of tests. And just so you know, in my studio here, it's usually around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. In terms of the testing parameters, so everyone knows what I did, I used the camera with manual exposure, C-Log 2 with the view assist turned on. The screen brightness was turned up all the way, which is 7. The autofocus was on, the IBIS and lens stabilization was on. I was using the Canon RF 24-70. I was recording internally to a CF Express Type B card using the XF EVC-S or the H.265 codec, which I think is the most common codec people will be recording in this camera. I had the auto power off temp setting set to high. I was using fully charged Canon OEM LPE6P batteries, and I was charging them with the OEM Canon brand charger that ships with the R5 II. I was also using the camera on a tripod with the LCD screen flipped out, and at the time of recording this, I was using the current firmware on the R5 II, which is version 1.0.1. Now, when recording in 4K up to 30 frames per second, you have the option of fine versus non-fine mode. The fine mode, like I said earlier, is oversampled from the full 8K, where the non-fine mode is line skipped or pixel binned or some other method. And usually when you're in the non-fine mode, you do get less overheating like you did in some of the previous Canon mirrorless cameras. So let's start with the 4K fine tests. These are, of course, without the cooling grip. We'll look at cooling grip a little bit later. So the baseline test here is 4K 24 fine. It ran for 1 hour and 15 minutes when the battery died, and the overheating meter was 8 out of 10. This was pretty low, so I ran this several times and got consistent results. So then I tried running it without the IBIS and lens stab on, because with Canon cameras, you can't like turn one or the other off. You have to turn them both on or both off if you're using a lens that has stabilization. But I got the same results. I got 1 hour and 15 minutes and the battery died. The overheating meter was also at 8 out of 10. I think this is probably because the camera was on a tripod and the IBIS and lens stab wasn't really doing very much. I'm assuming that if you were moving the camera around and getting the stabilization system to work a little bit more, then you probably would drain more battery and produce more heat. But for this, I just wanted to see what would happen. So I just turned it back on for the rest of the test. Then I tried using a fully manual lens to eliminate the power consumption from the autofocus, and it ran for 1 hour and 20 minutes with the overheating meter at 5. Now, this is definitely a little bit longer than the previous tests I did with the autofocus turned on, so it seems that autofocus uses a little bit more power, and it also heats up the camera a little bit more. But for the rest of the test, I will go back to using the RF 24-70 with the autofocus and stabilization turned on. Next, let's talk about the cooling grip. This is the cooling grip that was designed for the R5 II. This is the CF R20EP, and this mounts on the bottom of the camera and holds 2 batteries. So let me show you that. So the door is in the back here, and we can pop in our 2 batteries. Now this has 3 different speeds. This will run at low, medium, or high, and I'll demonstrate that briefly for you guys. And let me mount this on the bottom of the camera. And to do that, you have to remove the battery door. There's a little thing right here. You pop this out, and you can take out the battery. And this actually mounts on the cooling grip, so you don't lose this, which is kind of cool. So this mounts in here. And then we can insert this into the camera. And there's a lever up here to tighten up to get it to lock in. So like I said, there are 3 cooling speeds, and I'll demonstrate that. It sucks in the air from here, it goes through the camera and out over here. There is a vent. So let me show you in the camera here where you can change the settings for the cooling grip speeds. So if you're in the menu and you're on the wrench here, on the 4th tab over, you see cooling fan settings. You can turn the fan either off, on, which is always at the set speed, or it'll turn high speed when you're in standby. So let's just leave it always on. And as it reminds you, the fan speed noise can be recorded. So you do have the option, like I said, of low, medium, and high. So let's turn it on low. I find it to be pretty quiet on low. You can barely hear it. Here's medium. And here's high. I found the high to be pretty loud, so most of the testing I did with medium, I did a little bit with low as well. All right, so for the baseline test, I ran 4K 24 fine with the cooling grip and the fan speed set to low. The camera ran for 2 hours and 25 minutes when the battery died, and the overheating meter was at 6. I then tested out 4K 24 fine with the cooling grip and the fan speed set to medium. It also ran for 2 hours and 25 minutes when the battery died, and the overheating meter was at 4. So this is good news for recording in controlled temperature environments. I didn't get the camera to overheat and the batteries died. The overheating meter was up a little bit, but the camera wasn't close to overheating. Also interesting that the medium fan speed didn't really impact the battery life much over the low fan speed. Of course, the disadvantage with medium is it's a little bit louder. I didn't test this with high, but the fact that you can get about 2.5 hours with the grip with no other external power and the camera not overheating in a controlled environment like this, I thought that was pretty decent. So next I was interested to see how the camera performed with USB-C power delivery plugged in, to see if I could get longer run times because the battery didn't die, and also if it overheated the camera faster. Because often when you do use USB-C power delivery, it does heat up the camera a little bit faster, and that's with a lot of different manufacturers. So the first test, 4K 24 fine with USB-C power delivery and no cooling grip. It ran for 1 hour and 13 minutes. The camera overheated. So we weren't able to extend the runtime, which we got 1 hour and 15 minutes before, because the camera actually overheated in this situation. So the next thing is I wanted to run the camera with the cooling grip, with the fan speed set to medium, and also have USB-C power delivery plugged in. So the setup that I have right here. The camera actually ran for 4 hours and 5 minutes when I stopped the recording because I thought 4 hours was enough. The overheating meter was at 8, but the camera did not overheat. So the cooling grip in 4K 24 is very handy for indoor controlled temperature environments. I decided to not test the high fan speed since it's pretty loud, and I got pretty good results from low and medium. I did do a bunch of outdoor tests, like I said earlier, but I just couldn't get consistent results because of the weather, the sun, the temperature, etc. But here's a test that I did with 4K 24 fine and the cooling grip set to medium. It only ran for 43 minutes when it overheated. It was in the sun and probably about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So I do think that warmer temperatures will be a problem in the 4K fine mode, even with the cooling grip, because that test, it was only 75 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So what about the other 4K 24 modes? We have the non-fine, right, the line skip mode, and we also can shoot in 4K 24 in crop mode. So let's take a look at 4K 24 non-fine. This is without the cooling grip. It ran for 1 hour and 42 minutes when the battery died, and the overheating meter was turned on, but it was reading 0. This is actually a great performance and much longer in terms of runtime than the 4K 24 fine mode. Also, basically wasn't going to overheat. The meter was just turned on and was reading 0, so not really a issue with overheating there. 4K 24 crop mode, I got 1 hour and 35 minutes when the battery died, and the overheating meter was reading 1. So we got a little bit less runtime than the non-fine, and we basically had no overheating as well. Now, these results are very similar to what I remember getting in the R5 Mark I when you could get unlimited record times in the 4K 24 non-fine and crop modes. Now, Canon says not limited by heat in these modes, whereas the 4K fine mode has heat limitations. Now, I'm not sure if the 4K crop mode is a 5.1K oversample like the R5 Mark I, but I will be doing some more testing, comparing all the different recording modes, so make sure you hit subscribe if you're not already to make sure that you don't miss those videos. All right, so that was a lot about 4K 24. Let's talk about 4K 60. As most of you know, this is not oversampled in the R5 II. I think that's pretty much everyone's biggest complaint about the R5 II is the oversampled 4K 60. There isn't a fine mode, there's just a non-fine mode. Because this is not oversampled, I'm just assuming it won't be too much of a problem, so let's take a look. When I ran it here in the studio without the cooling grip, it ran for 1 hour and 13 minutes when the battery died, but the overheating meter was at 10 and it was really about to overheat. Now, this is a similar runtime to the 4K 24, and it did seem a little bit hotter, so again, it ran for over an hour till the battery died. It didn't technically overheat, but probably would have pretty soon after that if we had more battery life. So then I tested it with the cooling grip set to medium and 4K 60. I got 2 hours and 18 minutes when the battery died, and the overheating meter was at 5. So definitely better performance with the cooling grip in the indoor environment. Next, let's talk briefly about RAW. I did one test in 8K 24 RAW Lite. It ran for a total of 1 hour and 23 minutes. I actually had to format the card after 50 minutes because it filled up. Now, the battery died at 1 hour 23 and the overheating meter was at 5. This is interesting because it ran a little bit longer and the overheating meter was lower in the 8K RAW than the 4K fine mode, which actually makes sense because it's not having to do that oversampling, it's just recording the data. So it's a little bit less taxing than the 4K fine mode. So what are my conclusions and takeaways? Let me try to wrap all this up. I think the results are kind of what I expected. This is not a dedicated video camera with a built-in fan. If you need long run times without the cooling grip, or if you're shooting in warmer environments or outside in the heat, run the camera in the 4K non-fine mode or the 4K crop mode. I do think the cooling grip for long indoor run times works pretty well from what I saw here in my studio, but your mileage may vary, of course, depending on your conditions. I can only report on what I tested here in my studio, which I said before is around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And like I always say, if you're doing video professionally and want a reliable camera for all situations, like if you're shooting a wedding, an event, etc., then get a camera that has a built-in fan and is designed for continuous operation. Hopefully this is helpful if you're trying to decide if you want to get the R5 II. There will be more content coming up about the R5 II in comparisons with other cameras as well. So again, please hit subscribe if you're not already. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.